She stood confidently, sure it would all be sorted, but when one guard said, "You're not on the list," everything fell apart. And when he coldly added, "Go back to where you came from," her world shattered. What happened next shocked everyone to the core. But let's start from the very beginning. Laura Haley, a woman who had spent years building a career as a respected lawyer and activist, arrived at the embassy with a calm confidence. She was on her way to an important meeting with a diplomat she had collaborated with for years, a meeting that could potentially reshape parts of her legal work. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on her, but as she approached the embassy's entrance, something unsettling caught her eye. The guards. Their gaze was cold, their posture stiff. Their indifference wasn't just professional, it was almost clinical, as if they weren't even seeing her. Laura took a deep breath, prepared for the routine security check, but the words that came next left her stunned. "You're not on the list," one of the guards said, his tone final, dismissive. He didn't look at her directly, didn't even offer a courtesy of explanation, just the stark, dispassionate statement. For a moment, she froze, trying to process. She had scheduled this meeting weeks in advance. Her name, surely, had been placed on the guest list. She scanned her memory, checking every detail. No, everything was set. The meeting was confirmed. So why? Why was she being stopped now? "Is there a mistake? I've been in contact with—" she began, but the guard didn't even flinch. His response was sharp. "I said you're not on the list. Go back." Laura felt a tight knot in her stomach. Something was wrong, and the unease that crept into her chest wasn't the result of a misunderstanding. It was something more sinister, something she knew all too well. The guards weren't simply following protocol. This wasn't a mistake. They knew exactly what they were doing. A chill swept over her. It was a harsh truth she couldn't escape. This wasn't about her qualifications or her professional standing. It was about the color of her skin. No reason, no explanation beyond that cold, simple rejection. And as she stood there, staring back at the guard, she understood. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the reality she had been fighting against for years. Laura took a step forward, trying to steady her breath, but the words she had been rehearsing in her mind seemed to slip away, lost in the rising tide of frustration. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice tight with disbelief. "I've been in touch with the embassy. I'm expected here." The guard, his eyes cold and unblinking, simply stared at her for a moment before his lips curled into a sneer. "You should just go back where you came from," he spat, the words sharp, deliberate, cutting through the air like a knife. It wasn't just a casual remark. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a direct, calculated blow, not only to the situation at hand, but to her very identity. The weight of it hit her like a punch to the gut. For a second, Laura couldn't breathe. The words reverberated in her mind, mocking her. Go back where you came from. She had fought for years to earn the place she held, her success as a lawyer, her role as an activist, her voice in the legal community. And yet, here she was, reduced to a single crude judgment based solely on her skin. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. I can't let this affect me, she told herself. But the reality of the situation was sinking in too quickly. She tried again, her voice firm. I have a meeting with Ambassador Turner. I've been working with him for years. I'm not leaving. But it didn't matter. The guard's eyes never wavered from their icy distance, and the other guard stood silently behind him, a silent accomplice in this orchestrated rejection. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some clerical error. They weren't even pretending to care about any of the facts. The truth was undeniable. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. This was racism, pure and simple. The words were there, clear as day, but they felt like a punch to the face. For a moment, everything went still, as if the world around her had paused until the harsh, bitter truth took root in her chest. Laura stepped back from the embassy entrance, her pulse still hammering in her ears. The cold sting of the guard's words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't afford to linger on the hurt. This wasn't just a personal affront. This was a battle, one she couldn't walk away from. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. If she let this pass without consequence, it would only embolden them. It would be another quiet victory for the forces of hate, for the system that sought to keep people like her in their place. She didn't have time to wallow in frustration or anger. Her mind went into overdrive, calculating every step. She reached for her phone, dialing the first number she knew she could count on. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Her fingers moved quickly over the screen, reaching out to her media contacts, the ones who had always stood by her in moments like these. Within seconds, she sent out a message, explaining what had just happened. A deliberate act of discrimination right in the heart of the city, and she was going to make sure it wasn't ignored. She knew how quickly the press could move, how fast they could turn a story like this into a call for action. She couldn't allow this incident to fade away quietly. As she hung up, she didn't hesitate. She reached out to other activists in her network, people who would understand the gravity of the situation and the urgency behind it. She was already organizing the first steps of a demonstration right outside the embassy doors. They needed to feel the pressure, to see the unity of those who would stand with her. A demonstration, a voice. She could already imagine it. The chants, the signs, the crowd growing as word spread. This wasn't just about one woman's rejection at the door. This was about everyone who had ever been turned away because of the color of their skin, because of the prejudices that still lurked in the darkest corners of society. She couldn't let this moment pass without a fight. She had a plan now. There would be no silence. No more letting these things slide. It was time to take action. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The following day, the protest outside the embassy was nothing short of explosive. The streets were a sea of people, their voices united in defiance. News outlets had picked up the story overnight, amplifying the injustice that had unfolded just hours before. Signs with bold messages filled the air, demanding justice, equality, and accountability. Chants echoed down the block, a relentless call for change that couldn't be ignored. The atmosphere was charged, electric with the power of collective action. As more people gathered, their anger was palpable, but so was their determination. Laura stood among them, watching the movement she had sparked grow before her eyes. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was everyone's fight. Under the weight of the public outcry, the embassy was forced to respond. They issued a public apology, attempting to quell the rising tide of outrage, but the damage was done. The guards responsible for the incident were swiftly reassigned, their actions no longer defensible. The embassy officials who had been complicit were called out, forced to confront the consequences of their ignorance and prejudice. The protest had succeeded, not in a perfect resolution, but in making sure their voices were heard, loud and clear.